Salut, aujourd'hui, vous allez réviser les verbes au présent. Nous commençons avec les verbes qui terminent avec ER. Regular ER verbs, here are the endings for these kinds of verbs, very straightforward, and ones that you should be familiar with by French 4, French 5. Ici, quelques verbes irréguliers. We're going to take a look at how these verbs have some minor spelling changes, talk about why some of them have their spelling changes, so that way you can make sure that you have correct spelling in French. The verb payer, we see that the Y changes to an I inside of the boot, and then we still have payon and payer with the letter Y spelling. It's not IONS or IEZ. Manger is a regular verb, except that in the new form, we have to add the letter E after the G. The reason for this is that in French, if the letter G comes before an A, an O, or a U, it sounds like a G. And if it comes before an E or an I, it sounds like je. And we want to preserve the je sound from the infinitive manger. So instead of writing nous mangeons, we would like to write nous mangeons. Here's the verb commencer, following the same pattern as manger, where the letter C before A, O, and U is the K sound, and C before E and I is a S sound. So in the new form, we don't want nous commençons, we want nous commençons. If you encounter other verbs in French that end with CER, GER, they follow this same pattern. So be sure to keep that in mind when you are learning new and different verbs, and then you don't have to memorize a list if you can memorize the rule of sound preservation. Les verbes boot. Here we have a list of verbs that are boot verbs or stem changing verbs. So appeler and jeter, inside the boot, we have double consonants. So 2 L's for appeler, 2 T's for jeter. Acheter and modeler, we have an accent that appears inside of the boot, the accent grave. And préférer and sécher, we have that their accent aigus change to accent graves inside of the boot. And for préférer, it's the second letter E where the accent will change. Ici, les verbes qui terminent avec IR, we have one set of verbs that all behave the same way: to cover, to offer, to open, to suffer. You can take a look at some of their conjugations here. They conjugate like ER verbs. Ici, vous avez des verbes IR, agir, choisir. These endings should be familiar to you. The nous and vous form and the il and elle plural form. Make sure you add that extra ISS before the endings. Ici, autre verbe, IR, dormir, partir, sortir. You are taking off the TIR or the MIR and then adding the endings to conjugate these kind of verbs. Ici, des verbes qui terminent avec RE. So you take a look, you keep the letter D and then add on the ending. So the je form, I've highlighted the D really big, DS, DS, and then the il, elle, on form, you actually don't add an ending because the D will stay there the entire time. On the right-hand side, we see with entendant, entendez, entendre, that the D exists there in those conjugations as well. Les verbes réfléchis. So you should remember reflexive verbs. Many of them we've learned to talk about our daily routines, like waking up, brushing your teeth, brushing your hair, getting dressed. Here is a list of some very common ones. You don't need to necessarily memorize all of these, but a lot of these should already be familiar to you. And if you take a look at this list and you see one or two that you are unfamiliar with, or maybe you don't think you know how to conjugate, please take the time to go to word reference or to ask in class so that way you know how to use these verbs. Les usages des verbes pronominaux. So reflexive verbs, we know that whoever is doing the action is receiving the action. We talk about this when we do the morning routine. I wake myself up. I brush my own teeth. The reflexive part, the reflexive pronoun, is showing that I'm doing this action to myself. Another reason to have a pronominal verb is to say that two or more people are doing an action to each other. So the example, les garçons se parlent, means that the boys are talking to one another. And you would only use this tense in the plural form. You wouldn't use it for je, but you're saying that these two boys are both talking and listening to one another. Aussi, parfois, il y a des expressions idiomatiques. So sometimes there are verbs that are idiomatic that require a reflexive pronoun in French, but do not necessarily require that same reflexive in English. So, for example, ils se souviennent des vacances. They remember the vacations. In English, we don't need to say they remember themselves, the vacations. It's implied that they are the ones remembering it. And pronominal verbs can also be used for like passive voice. Le français se parle dans cette classe is French is spoken here, like in this class. Les conjugaisons. So, in order to conjugate a reflexive or pronominal verb, it's the same conjugations for the other verbs in the same category, whether it's an ER verb, an RE verb, or one of the different subcategories of IR verbs. You just need to make sure that you add the reflexive pronoun. So the m, t, s, second nu, that second vu, or s. You add those, and then we know that it's I'm the one who get up, or we're the ones who are waking up. Et ici, vous avez une liste des verbes. Comment est-ce que vous savez les conjuguer au présent? If you take a look at this list, and there are some verbs that you do not know how to conjugate in the present, please take the time to use word reference to find the conjugations, so that way you are prepared to use these verbs in the present tense. Merci et à la prochaine.